We don't go to aspiring tennis player and say, I'm going to hire 4 coaches or instructors to teach you various aspects of this game. Except none of those 4 people have ever played tennis in their life. None of them will know what the other 3 are telling you to do. And then 4 months into this process, we're going to fire those 4 coaches. And then we're going to give you a list of 1,000 other coaches that you know nothing about that you will then pick from at random, spend 4 months with them. We're going to repeat that 8 times, and then you're going to be a great tennis player. That is our educational system.
Hello, and welcome to the Future podcast series by UIN. For this episode, Cameron McCoy, founder and chief adapting officer at the Adaptive Group, sat down with Ben Nelson, founder and CEO of Minerva Project and founder of Minerva University, to explore how Minerva designed a university around transferable learning, shared assessment, and graduates' ability to act wisely in unfamiliar situations. They also delved into why institutional purpose, community participation, and sustained commitment are essential to meaningful reform across established universities.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cameron McCoy. Some of you I've met before and others I haven't, but it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm lucky enough to be able to play host today to my good friend Ben Nelson, who has one heck of a story to tell us and who embodies UIIN's entrepreneurial mindset and the 5 principles of effectuation to a T. And I think one of the things that I deeply appreciate about Ben is he hasn't just settled in and said, well, we created a university, we'll just keep doing that. Instead, he's pushed further and is working really hard to impart some of the things that he's learned and the team has learned at Minerva to other institutions across the world. And so, Ben, if you want, maybe just a minute to introduce yourself, because I won't do nearly as good a job as you, but it's an honor to have you today.
Great to be here. Thanks so much, Cameron, for having me, and thank you everybody for joining us. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of Minerva created a new way of educating that is really focused on measuring and teaching how well a student can apply what they have learned, as opposed to just see if they can pass a test or recall the information. And that measurement of application really means to ensure that you can apply what it is they've learned in radically different contexts. And so not only do students learn a set of tools, cognitive tools, they apply from subject to subject. They apply them both in academic and real world settings, and they apply them from one culture to another because the students live in various countries around the world during their 4 years. And they apply it when they are producing their own work versus when they're critiquing others, when they're thinking on their feet versus when they have time to be deliberative, et cetera, et cetera. And that measurement of breadth of application is something that higher education has never done before, but is actually the key to real learning. It's what we colloquially know as wisdom, knowing what to do in a situation you've never encountered before. And we created an institution to demonstrate that indeed, not only can you teach these things, but when you do, you have better outcomes for learners than any university in the world, more than Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. And now we're taking that same model and helping build Minerva programs, these same curricular, pedagogical, and assessment systems for other universities as well as for high school programs as well.
First off, thank you for that introduction. I truly appreciate the way that you guys have approached this and then continue to push on it and evolve not only the framework, the academic framework, but the technology that gets associated with it that actually makes all this possible. And that sort of takes me into this idea of why did you go new? You must have seen some opportunity here that just wasn't being harnessed, and some barriers to taking this approach, and or something that was wrong, which I can talk about in more depth if you'd like to as well with the current approach. But why not do this at one of those institutions? Why start a new university?
Yeah, it's interesting because when the goal is certainly to reform existing institutions, why is it that you start new? And it's a bit of a different or unique lesson that I had in my life. In a previous life, I was the CEO of a company called Snapfish, which was an online photography firm. And we were doing what we refer to as personal publishing because it wasn't just printing photos, but photo books and calendars and all sorts of ways, sharing photos online, etc. And we were really quite successful for a number of lucky reasons over the years. Shortly into our journey, about 4 years in, we were approached by a couple of large retailers. In fact, the two of the four largest photo finishing retailers in the country, and eventually the largest. So we actually worked with three of the four largest photo finishers in the United States. And the first partner that we worked with was an organization called Costco. They do these large big box
I love
retail
Costco.
stores from the United States.
Yes.
They came to us and they say, "Hey, we do a lot of photo finishing. We have this website. It's a vendor. We're not very, we want to switch it up. You seem to be doing well. Can we get a version of your site for our company?" And we said, "Sure, we can. We can't customize it that much because we never worked in a private label way. So we can customize a few things, but fundamentally, you're going to get what we have." And they said, "Okay, well, you have to make sure it works." And so we'd never done this before. We built this whole website for them, and this was at a time. This was back in 2005 when building websites was not trivial. So it's not like it is
Yeah.
today where you're like, "Oh yeah, I'll be doing a website thing goes overnight."
Yeah.
And what we were replacing was a photo website built by a company that only built photo websites for retail photo finishing. This was all they did. This is the first time that we did it. They had functionality that we never had before. So you could upload an image online and print it down to the store within an hour, something that we'd never done before. So it was a brand new implementation for us, etc. Because it was such a stark cutoff, we brought the old site down on Tuesday night and brought ours up on Wednesday morning, which is the slowest photo finishing day of the week. Wednesday is the time when people got their prints the least. This is for people who don't. We used to take photos and print them. That's it used to be a thing people did. And we didn't send out an email. We didn't notify customers. There was no announcement whatsoever because we were just trying to slowly ramp up. If you looked at the volume the website generated on Tuesday for print orders and compared it to that Wednesday, we were up 10x
Wow.
by doing nothing except for putting our user interface and workflows versus a company whose sole job was to create websites for that company. And then over the ensuing 3 years, we increased their volume by 2 additional orders of magnitude. 3 order of magnitude increase in 3 years from the current basis for a website that had been up and running for, I think, 3 years already. And by the way, when we built the photo websites for Walgreens, for Walmart, we saw even larger absolute volumes, but they didn't have websites before that did these things. And so
Yeah.
what I realized at the time was that if you were to go into a market serving a partner first, what would wind up happening in the solution is what happens with effectively all enterprise software. You ask the partner, "What do you want?" And usually the people you ask at the partner are not the people who are going to use this, certainly not the end users. And they're almost never the people for whom the business is oriented around, the customer, right? They're usually purchasing people or technology people and all the rest, and they are absolutely and utterly clueless. And the folks who are building, if they're building for the enterprise, they're building not for the end customer, they're building for the enterprise. And so the ability to build for the end customer was absolutely paramount to get your product right. And once you have that product right, to then offer it to the rest of the enterprise base now makes sense. And by the way, that's a lesson that you could see from the early days of Amazon, right? Amazon built a direct-to-consumer website, and then it started powering the websites of Target, of at the time Toys R Us, and others. AWS was the infrastructure built for Amazon, right? And then they realized this is infrastructure that anybody can use, right? And it became a gigantic business. And so the idea of honing what it is that you're offering is constraint free from the demands of partners and people who think they know. But effectively, if you're selling to them, by definition, they don't know. If they did know, they would already have a solution they would need to buy from you. And in education, that was triply true because fundamentally we were inventing a completely new way of learning, a new way of assessing. And if we were to go to a partner up front and say, hey, we'd like to build this with you or for you, it would never look the way it looks today. And even without that influence, I still had to bring all sorts of academics along that we hired to understand, even partially, what it is that we were trying to do. And then the ability to continue to iterate that is crucial.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I certainly can see it from my biased lens of experience in higher ed, but you know that because we've talked about this a number of times. And to sort of restate this, it sounds like the lessons from Snapfish were you got to design with the human in the center, the end user in the center. And in the case of education, the learner is really who we're serving. And so to redesign the software and tools and approaches from a learner-centered standpoint, you just couldn't do that inside of an existing institution because of all the various biases and constraints and, whatever they might be that are preventing you from reimagining how we actually might center learners, vice, center all the other constituents that happen to be party to education more broadly. Is that fair?
Exactly right. Exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And even though, we could partner with institutions on a broad basis for accreditation purposes or things like that, the independence and the ability to design our own institution effectively was absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and so I have two follow-on questions to that. One is, and we just touched on this learner-centric idea. What was it that you all, when you looked at existing institutions and said, we have to disrupt this. There's an opportunity for us here. We're going to take some agency and we're going to redesign this with learners in the middle of it. But what approach did you take to that?
Yeah. There were two overarching influences. One, research from the science of learning, how the brain actually works. The second, historical views of kind of peak learning experiences or peak learning eras in education when universities were much more coherent in their approach. But the easy way of kind of digesting it is to think about what is it that we do when we want to educate people on things that actually, quote unquote, matter. And by matter, I don't mean that they're consequential for the world. In fact, quite the opposite. Matter in the sense that they have to go up and perform, right? So if you want to teach somebody to play a sport or play a musical instrument, things that aren't by and large crucial for livelihood or for humanity or what have you, how is it that we do that? How is it that we know how to teach people? I'll tell you how we don't do it. We don't go to an aspiring tennis player or guitar player and say, well, I've got a great idea. I'm going to spare absolutely no expense. I'm going to hire 4 different coaches or instructors to teach you various aspects of this game, except none of those 4 people have ever played tennis in their life. None of them will know what the other 3 are telling you to do. And then 4 months into this process, we're going to fire those 4 coaches. And then we're going to give you a list of 1,000 other coaches that you know nothing about, none of whom have played tennis, that you will then pick from at random, spend 4 months with them, not knowing what the other people are telling you to do and not knowing what the previous instructor is telling you to do. We're going to repeat that 8 times, and then you're going to be a great tennis player. The notion that somebody would approach teaching anybody anything that way is absurd. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. That is our educational system. High school, university, it is exactly the same. And it defies everything we know about learning. Spaced, deliberate practice, practicing what it is that you're doing over years and years. Recontextualization. You're not going to learn to play a sport by hitting a ball against the wall for 4 years, right? You have to play in different conditions against different kinds of opponents. When you're on offense, on defense, when you serve, when you return, etc. So all of these different types of conditions are necessary for you to be able to learn anything, learn to be able to do anything. And so it's that insight which comes back to think about the design of a university. And in fact, what is missing at universities is all the things that they say they do. No university has on its website, come here to pass tests in chemistry, comparative literature, and economics. That's not the selling point. The selling point is we'll teach you how to think critically, and we'll teach you how to problem solve, and we'll teach you how to be effective communicators. But what you do is you go there to pass tests in comparative literature and economics, and biology. And the reason that the other stuff is talked about as opposed to what's assessed is that everybody knows that the other stuff is what's important, but it's not actually taught. It's not actually measured. The assumption is you pick it up by accident, right? So in the tennis analogy, it's like, oh, we're going to teach you basket weaving and cooking and you're going to learn tennis by accident. But this is a tennis camp. Well, that's, again, it's insane. It makes absolutely no sense because if you want to teach those things, you have to teach them. You have to measure them. You have to incentivize them. Your grade point average should be derived from what it is that you want to teach as opposed to the context in which you teach it, etc. And so what we did was we used the context of some traditional academic disciplines, but made them more interdisciplinary, more real world, more applied. And then we actually anchored the education on the components of those tools. And the students practiced those tools day after day, month after month, year after year. They got assessed on those tools, again, on the breadth of their application, not just on whether or not they can recall them, but seeing how they consistently and correctly they can apply them across multiple dimensions of transferability. And therefore, we effectively turned the center of gravity education on its head. And again, the outcomes for students is vastly better than those who sit, cram for a test, pass the test, and forget everything that was on the test. Because what they're doing is they're actually learning what they can use in day-to-day life. And that's and that was the kind of the proof point behind Minerva.
Ready to unlock the entrepreneurial potential of your students, staff, and institution? Our training programs help you embed entrepreneurial thinking across education and research. Whether you're supporting academics, running incubators, or shaping university strategy, our courses give you the insights to make entrepreneurship thrive. Explore upcoming programs at uiin.org/training and empower the next generation of innovators.
There was a lot there, which I love. I could talk to you for hours about this. I'm sure that our audience would enjoy that as well, and probably have plenty of fascinating questions. I love this tennis analogy because people can relate to the need to practice certain skills and then apply them during a game. But it also really illustrates this finite versus infinite game idea that every class is a finite game. You don't get to go back and do it again, right? And we, on the front end of education, we do a really good job of limiting the number of players that get to play the game, right? And what I love about what you guys have done is you said, look, here are the skills that you have to do whatever this opportunity is. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to spread those out across your experience really intentionally, looking at, correct me if I get this right or wrong, but the habits and concepts, the key habits you have to practice to do whatever the skill might be, and the fundamental theoretical concepts that someone has to know to practice that particular skill, where in your case, you mentioned critical thinking, but it might be tennis and serving, right? Or volleying or whatever, backhand. And so you've taken those and you said, look, we're gonna interleave, to use the correct term, those across your learning experience, really intentional, but it's going to be connected. So your tennis coaches are all talking to each other, exactly, and they're all able to assess you over time in a formative way, which I think gets really lost in some of this sometimes, right? And you tell me, because when I try to talk about some of the things that you guys have done to faculty and other leaders, the formative assessment piece is really challenging for them to grasp, right? Because it's longitudinal and we're so used to the summative assessment tool. And it's not necessarily you're throwing out the summative assessment, but it's the longitudinal piece here of allowing person to grow over time and be assessed by multiple coaches really intentionally with the same framework, I think is really an important piece of this.
Yeah, and I think again, it's where success needs to come from. I often say that, but in Minerva programs, the professors assess, but the institution grades, and in many ways, the world grades, right? Because you take your assessments, but with an understanding that the universe is not encapsulated within a particular class, right? The universe is the world. And the more that you approximate the variety that a student will encounter in the world, and you gather assessments from your coaches, You say, hey, your footwork is off. Hey, your backhand is strong. Your forehand is super weak. You've got to work on that, right? And and then you can say, hey, I can piece those things together. And if I understand data, I understand how to interpret these things, then I can understand what is it that I need to practice more. What is it that I've already mastered and need to practice every once in a while to keep up? And what is it
Mhm.
that I really need to get to an understanding of because I don't understand it at all? And
Yeah.
that can't be done in a single classroom. And so the idea, exactly as you
Yeah.
said, that all of these coaches are working with and contributing to the same data set to develop the human is such an important concept in learning. And it is, again, completely and utterly extinct at our in our university system.
Yeah. It's more ecosystem than ecosystem,
Exactly right.
right?
That's
Yeah.
a good phrase. I'll attribute that to you.
Yeah, you could borrow that. I probably borrowed that from somebody. So I mean, and I think, the other fascinating thing about what Minerva University does, and you mentioned this at the beginning, I don't want it to get lost here, is that the learners move around the world
Yeah,
and put these skills to work in learning where learning occurs. It's not always at a chalkboard or a
right.
whiteboard in a giant hall. It's active learning with real intention, which I think is really important, especially the way the world is evolving, right? And one of the things that you're noted for having said is, and I'm curious how you react to this today, is we're going to build a better university than Harvard. I
Yeah.
think I'm paraphrasing, right? Which I think I recognize that a lot of people in higher ed, they see that and they go, wow, boy, this guy's full of himself, right? You're going to build a better university than Harvard, blah, blah, blah. And they start to dismiss it, right? But there's a lot to be learned, both from for university leaders as they try to evolve, but also just broadly in leadership from your pathway. And so I guess the underlying question here is about the Harvards of the world and everybody who emulates them are perhaps not best positioned for the way the world is evolving, right? We're moving into an AI rich, AI driven, and I worry we're going to lose language more than anything else, but we're into this time of society across the globe that really needs a model that is focused on technology, pedagogy, global interfaces, how you navigate AI and leverage it really intentionally and purposefully. And so I guess what I wonder is, do you think that the prestigious institutions, I'm reticent to say elite, the prestigious institutions and those who emulate them are prepared, or is there something that they ought to take from what you guys have done at Minerva?
Sadly, they're vastly unprepared. And as you said, the claim of building the best university in the world seems absurd and audacious. But when you think again about that analogy, you realize the bar is extraordinarily low, right? And that's the thing that we have to accept, that what we've
Yeah,
been doing is we've been ranking institutions, at least when it comes to undergraduate education, and oftentimes graduate
yeah,
education, based
yeah,
on the absolutely wrong metric. In some ways, when you employ that multiple chaotic choose your own adventure coach model, it doesn't really matter who's better or worse at on the margin on whether or not, well, boy, he never played tennis, but he knows so much about balls bouncing because so that's so much better than the person who doesn't know much about balls bouncing. Not really, because the physics of bouncing balls is not nearly as important as developing the intuitions around how the ball will bounce when you hit it in certain ways and certain spins.
yeah.
So that's the issue. We've been ranking on different things. And when you just leapfrog the model, and this is really what Minerva has proven, when we built Minerva for the very first time, we made so many mistakes. We've done it in so many wrong ways, right? And we still had the best graduate outcomes in the world. In fact, you should just ask Harvard. Harvard has accepted more than half of Minerva undergraduates who've applied for graduate programs at Harvard. It has not accepted its own undergraduates, right? Not even close. Not even 25% of Harvard undergraduates who apply for postgraduate positions at Harvard get those positions. And so Harvard itself is saying Minerva University is a better undergraduate experience than the Harvard undergraduates, right? Or Princeton or Stanford or any other group of students that applies. So the reality is that it's not that, and I've always said this, it's not that Minerva is so great. It is that the sector is so fundamentally broken that any attempt to do something coherent is going to already leapfrog the sector. And of course, over the last decade plus, we've taken an initial prototype and continue to refine it and actually make it better and better. And that practice and that honing has enabled us to really not only to have a large delta at the beginning, but actually to increase it over time. So yes, those highly prestigious institutions have a great deal to learn. But the most important thing for any institution to learn is to recommit to purpose and to make its structural and organizational and learning decisions from a point of view of purpose. The reason that we do everything that we do is we understand what our purpose is, which is that our students, when they go into the real world, need to deploy their wisdom for the sake of the world, not for the fact that they need to go into the next step or make incrementally another dime than another student. And when you understand that graduates of our institutions are making what we refer to as decisions of consequence, decisions that affect their lives less than the lives of other people, right? Because they're going to be making decisions as people who run organizations, who vote, who have opinions on policy, right? That those implications are ones that the university is responsible for in many ways. And when the university understands that, and they understand the criticality of putting more and more wise people into the world, they will have to stop the practices that they're currently employing in the way they're structured.
Yeah. Ben, I've got another really important question. Do you have a little more time? I know we were slated for half an hour here, but if we can push just a couple minutes, that'd be great.
I can.
Good. Well, hopefully folks can hang on. Obviously, I'll try not to keep us going for too long, but part of what you've done here and what I appreciate with the Minerva project, what you've done is you've said, look, we recognize that we've learned a lot and we've created some value. And part of what we're going to do now is to mobilize others. And in my own lived experience, having spent some time working with you guys and trying to push some of these initiatives and ideas forward in existing institutions, I can attest it's very difficult. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is this real challenge around fear and connecting people back to the institution's purpose, right? There's this fundamental disconnect, at least I see, between the institution's purpose and an individual's purpose inside the institution, perhaps. And so I just wonder, are there some things that you guys have picked up along the way that could help leaders who are trying to reshape and reinvent and reinvigorate institutions to get past these challenges of change?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a number of things, and we've come up with all sorts of roadblocks when we've talked to institutions. The need to get everybody sign off before you start work, the people who get all up in arms about you can't come and tell me what to do. I value my independence, etc. I don't know if I wouldn't call it fail safe, but certainly the most successful approach that we have seen is getting an institution to engage its community in a conversation on purpose. And I'll give you a kind of a fascinating example of this. I was at one of our partner institutions and was doing kind of a launch event, and it was part of a larger event where they were getting ready for the new year, etc., new academic year. So they would have different people of the institutions present. And it was a relatively small institution that had, I think, about 300 faculty members. So they were all gathered in a large room, luckily around circular tables. And one of the people that went before me was a strategy person at the university and, put up slides and very perfunctorily just moved past one of the slides that said what the university aspires for its graduates to do, right? And it was the typical leaders, creators, blah, 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 blah. So when I went up, I said, you know what, forget what I was going to say. Let's go back to that slide. And I asked him to put the slide back up, and he did. And I asked the room, and I said, hey, just want to make sure, is there consensus that this is the goal? That you want your graduates to be successful contributing members of society in these various vectors? And they were generic enough where even a group of faculty said, yes, absolutely, this is what we want. And I said, great. You're all sitting at tables, round tables. I want you to talk amongst yourselves and list out what are the things that your graduates should be able to do in order to achieve these goals. These are your goals. These are not my goals. These are your goals. You agree that this is the point of your education. So go through and list what is it that they're capable of doing in order to achieve those goals. And assume 100% of your students have been able to achieve this 10 years after graduation? Go and work amongst yourselves. So they talk, they list stuff, and then I have them share these things out. So they'll say, oh, I want to make sure that the students have a lot of empathy, that they're culturally competent, that they're able to distinguish a fact from a claim, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they go popcorn them out. So you start getting some repetition. Great. Anybody else? Anybody? No. Great. Wonderful. Great list. Fascinating that you've come up with this list, because it means that the university must be extraordinarily advanced, because not a single one of you listed a single academic subject. Not one. So clearly, this is what you're teaching. You don't need our help. And there was a lot of silence in the room.
Yeah, I bet.
And so when you ground a community, not on what somebody comes in and tells them is important, but what they have consensus around, right? What they have said, like no university wants to graduate a student that doesn't understand the difference between a fact and a claim. Mm-hmm. Like that you can't find a professor anywhere in the world that would say, no, they don't need to understand the difference between those two things. No university wants to graduate a student that doesn't understand how to tailor what it is that they're saying, given the audience they're talking to. Mm-hmm. Right? No university wants to graduate students that aren't able to think about second and third order effects and unintended consequences. Right? So when you bring them along that journey, and you say, oh, well, yeah, we should be doing that. And you say, as it happens, there is an entire science behind how to do this. There's a demonstration now of a number of different universities that have implemented this to great success. And good news, you can still teach courses about the Renaissance gardens of Italy. You just need to create an overlay, right, to be able to do that, and a foundation for students to be able to understand these frameworks, these habits of mind and foundational concepts that they're going to be applying throughout those years. And when you go through that process of transformation first, and this is something that we've learned, that transformation process, community-wide transformation process, is crucial to make sure that it is a successful implementation. It's not foolproof. There are obviously some people who will find cantankerous reasons to resist. Yeah. But by and large, you will get the vast majority of the community on board in that way.
Love that. We had one quick question come in, and it's a tail right onto this, what you've just said, but specific to what a faculty member may do who's been advocating for these kind of shifts and changes at an institution, but are meeting the bureaucracy and pushback that we're very familiar with. Is there anything that you might be able to suggest to George and his friends?
Yeah, look, in many ways, you have to engage with that same conversation around purpose with the administration. You have to get the administration to say, look, we have too big of a responsibility to ignore. I've always found that it is very hard to argue with the moral high ground. Very hard. And when you approach something from the point of view of society, from the point of view of the responsibility of the institution to the world, and you put the other person into a position that says, oh, universities have done an excellent job. Look at the state of society. It's wonderful. If you get that position, then you know you're in the wrong institution, right? If somebody says the world does largely not have major problems, universities do a fabulous job, we do great along with every other university, or an administrator that says, oh yeah, other universities are a disaster, but boy, the way we teach Econ 101, transformative. Right? Those are massively disingenuous types of things. Whereas if you go back and say, hey, I want, brass tacks, let's get active learning for all of our professors, university presidents say, oh my God, forget it. I need to deal with the faculty? No way. Yeah. But when you commit them, you have that moral high ground. Don't talk about the implementation. Don't talk about the what. Talk about the why. Talk about the responsibility. Yeah. And then when they say, absolutely, but what can we do about it? You can point and say, hey, there are people who know how to do this, right? Yeah. And we're an example. I'm sure there are other people that are doing different things along these ways, but you can use us as an example. And you can say, hey, this is what they do. They work with institutions to help them transform.
Yeah. And again, right, it's not pure isomorphic implementation. It's contextualized, which I think is really an essential piece here, that you're grasping onto the institution's purpose. And each institution, while we have relatively the same purpose, we also have unique context. And I think that's an important piece that you guys are able to pull out. Okay, last word. You get the last word, my friend. Thank you for being with us today. And thanks to everybody else who's joined us. Ben, last word is yours, my friend.
Yeah, well, again, thank you so much for having me. And I think I've hit over points over and over again. Maybe the one concept that I would leave you with is much like education, real education, reform and changing systems takes a long, long time. And it's crucial to understand that a conversation, an attempt, a class is not going to create the lasting effect. And so being able to stick to the mission, to stick to the goal and purpose, and to be relentless is really the only way that we can get real change in the world. And I hope this has helped inspire you to see that with some sticking to it, you can really see effective change happen.
It's really tough to be patient, isn't it? But you guys have done a remarkable job. Well, thank you, Ben. And we've put in the chat here your LinkedIn and the links to both Minerva Project and the university. And for those of you who are asking how you might support the work of folks going through this challenge, certainly UIIN is a big piece of that, but I'm sure that any outreach to the folks at Minerva would be welcome. So I'll say that on their behalf. But certainly, yeah, to your point, Ben, let's hire those graduates and that'll create some momentum. Thank you again, Ben. I've enjoyed talking to you today and I hope to see you again soon. And thanks to everybody else for being here.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you are enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.